retribution, and it seems to make a lot of sense. It addresses injustice in such a way that people will be discouraged from hurting and doing wrong things to others. It keeps things from escalating like the Hatfields and the McCoys. But what does eye for an eye mean? Well, he was condemning retaliation and personal retribution of the law of Moses. First of all, when they were saying eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, the common people were doing just what we're comfortable with. If somebody hurted you, they would hurt them right back. If you poke their eye out, they literally poke your eye out. And yet, Leviticus 19:18, if they would have applied all the law, said, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself." So that's the part they didn't remember. They remembered the other part, which was concerning the judges and not personal retribution at all. It was for their courts. The judges shall inquire diligently, Deuteronomy 19:21. And if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he is meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. And the rest shall hear and fear and shall never again commit any such evil among you. So in the courts, they would apply that, but it was never intended to settle grudges or to have retribution on a personal level. Jesus gives us some examples of how they were misapplying this scripture. He gives us 4 scenarios. Matthew 5:39, I tell you not to try to get even with a person who's done something to you. So he says you're not to try to get even. Going back to what Leviticus had said, you're not to take vengeance, you're to love other people as yourself. He gives us scenario chapter 1. Number 1, when a person slaps you on the right cheek, turn and let that person slap you on the other cheek. And the author said he had a neighbor that had a barking dog, and it barked all night. So finally at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, he called his neighbor, and he barked real loud in the phone and hung up. And he's saying he probably shouldn't have done that. But is that a natural response? A lot of people would do that. The fact that Jesus said right cheek is significant. Okay, if I'm slapping with my right hand, I'm slapping with my right hand, how can I slap his right cheek? It was a backhand. It was an insult. It wasn't done to hit him or punish him. It was an insult. He used the back of his hand, and Jesus saying it was the right cheek is very significant. In that culture at that time, it was especially disrespectful and insulting to backhand somebody. It was like an insult, and there was a different penalty in their court of law for backhanding somebody or just hitting them. So, is there somebody in our life that seems to have it out for you? A neighbor who's always provoking you? I know the barking dog deal. Family member who always antagonizes you? A coworker who is passive aggressive? What happens when they walk into the room? This is a quote. He says, does your spirit go into Cobra Kai fighting stance? No, you're ready to go. You're ready for a 1-2. That's maybe how we feel. It might feel right. But Jesus taught that when somebody treats us with disrespect, we're not to get easily offended. We're not to mouth off. We're not to side-eye or to check them out and give them a dirty look. You won't feel like it. But Jesus said, if you do this, you will be blessed and you will make a difference. Why? You'll make God look good. Why? Because everybody expects the common response, the default setting that every human seems to have. They expect you to insult them back. They expect you to do whatever everybody else does. They expect you to do all these things, and when we as a Christian refuse to let it get to us, Jesus says, you are salt, you're going to make a difference. People are going to see that you're a follower of me. Anybody have any comments? A soft answer turneth away wrath. Yep. And that's true. Is it easy to give a soft answer when somebody's hollering at you? Not for me.
You can say, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you're sorry that you did it or that it happened. You're just sorry that they took offense.
People need to know that we're making God look good in situations like this. And all of us, how many of you fail in this? How many of you have done the wrong thing? I have. If you're honest, probably everybody would have their hands up. Some of us don't raise hands. But we all don't respond right. We do what everybody expects us to do, and that's not right. We're letting Jesus down and the church down. The second scenario he gives us is in Matthew 5:40. If somebody sues you for a shirt, give him your coat as well. We have to look at the Jewish background on this one to understand what Jesus is teaching. First of all, the person is being sued. This is not a robbery, but it's a picture that we owe something to that person, and they've gone to court and sued us for what we owe them. To give up one's coat was forbidden under the Old Testament law. In Exodus 22:25, it says, if you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not exact interest from him. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else will he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. So in their culture, it was against the law to take somebody's coat as usury. In a court of law, if they owe you money, you could take it for the day, but at nighttime you had to give it back. This was a heavy outer garment, and it was also their blanket they slept under. So God said it's cruel for you to take somebody's blanket they sleep on, their outer coat. You can steal them, you can sue them for the other clothing that they're wearing, but you cannot take his coat. This was a national right of every Israelite. It is your right to keep your coat. So think about what Jesus is saying to the one who sues you, and just give him your cloak as well. The point is, we're to be willing to pay our debts and even more than what we owe. If somebody is suing us, Jesus said, if you owe them, pay them back what you owe and more. What man in the Bible practiced that? He met Jesus and he said, I'm going to give 4 times what I stole. I'm going to give it back to him. Who was it? Zacchaeus, right. So this is what Jesus is meaning here. If somebody sues you, then you give him more than what he asked. And that's what Jesus is teaching. We give above and beyond what is owed to those whom we owe. The person had the right to keep the cloak, but Jesus says, give it also. Sometimes following Jesus means we give up our rights. You can't take a man's coat, and yet Jesus says, give it to him. Because you're giving up your right, you owe it to him, because it's the right thing to do. It's a righteous thing to do. And that would be pretty hard. How many of you, when you pay a bill, it's not quite as bad as being sued, how many of you put a little extra? Some of us will. If somebody, a contractor, something does some work for us and they do a good job, or a waiter waits on us, they do a good job, we'll we'll give them more than a tip, perhaps. I know a lot of Christians who do that. I know a lot of Christians who stiff the waiters every time. So we might be willing to give our coat up for somebody we love. Would you give up a coat for your grandma? Sure you would. Would you give up a coat for one of your kids? Sure you would. Because they'd probably pay us back. But giving up a coat for somebody who is suing us, would you do that? No, that dirty scoundrel, that crook, I'm not giving him anything. No more than what the judge says. No thanks. Nobody does that. And that's exactly the point that Jesus is trying to make. If you are the kind of person that when you are sued or you're demanded for a payment and you go beyond what you're owed, what you owe, the world is going to notice that kind of a response. And that is the salt that Jesus is talking about. You look different. You give somebody that's been crying about a bill that you were a little late on, give them extra or whatever. And what will that do to a landlord? You say, I'm sorry, I was 5 days late, and you hand him an extra 50. What would that do to a landlord? You don't owe it to him. But what would it do to him? You know what it would do to him. It would make a difference because people don't do that. The third scenario he gives is if a soldier forces you to carry a pack 1 mile, carry it 2 miles. And here's the problem that we all have, and that is it says forces you. If someone would ask you to do it, would you do it? Probably. But if they say you have to do it, if the government says you have to do it, people get mad and they will not do it. That was proven with the COVID shots. If they'd have just said we recommend it, probably most everybody would have gotten the shot. But when they say you have to take it, then nobody wants to get a shot. Whether it was a good shot or not, that's another conversation. But it's the point that if you say you have to do it, nobody wants to do it. And that's the way it was with these soldiers. The minute you feel forced, our pride kicks in, we get sensitive, we get angry because somebody's trying to control us. The Romans could command civilians to carry the luggage of military personnel for a prescribed distance, and that distance was 1 mile. They could not make you go any further. The Jewish person didn't have an option, so they would pick up the pack, carry it a mile, but not another step. They couldn't be forced into a second mile. The Roman soldiers were their enemy, and they treated the Jews like dogs. So imagine how this went. A Jewish man is coming home from work. He's tired and hungry, wants to get home. He sees a soldier on the side of the road, and he says, oh, great. That's the last thing I need is for somebody to make me walk a mile carrying his luggage. He throws the pack on the ground and says, okay, dog, carry my luggage 1 mile. And so the man gets angry. The Jewish man is upset all of the way. He carries the luggage. And exactly at 1 mile, he drops the luggage. But what if, Jesus said, he said, would you like me, would it help you out if I carried that luggage 1 more mile? Who does that? Nobody does that. And that, again, is the point. It feels like you're giving up power to do something that somebody says you're forced to do, like the government, but actually you're taking control back because the second mile, nobody's making you do it. You choose to do it. And imagine what that Roman soldier would have said when he got back to the barracks. Hey, you'll never guess what happened today. I asked this guy along the road to carry my pack for a mile, and as soon as we got to a mile, he said, hey, would you like me to carry it another mile? How far would that go through the Roman barracks? Man, that would spread everywhere. There's a crazy dude that carried some soldier's pack for 2 miles. So Jesus is telling us to have a second mile mentality with one person, one at a time. Go further than you're expected to go. If someone insults you, try this. Say something nice to them. If your spouse criticizes you, compliment them. If someone blames you, bless them. If your server is short with you, give an extra tip. Now you would, oh, that's unheard of. You know, I've actually been ashamed to go out with some Christian people because they wouldn't tip at all, or if the waiter made some mistake of some sort, well, she only deserves so much, and just treat those girls like trash. I don't see how we can be Christians and treat people like that. Our society is weird in that they pay those people by tips, but being that's the way it is, Christians ought to be salt. We ought to respect people and go the second mile with them. Do you think they'd notice that if they really didn't give you a good service, but you gave them a good tip anyway? You think they'd remember you? So if we go the second mile, it's going to bless our life like it promises in this sermon. And it'll also make a difference in the world, and it makes God look good because his people are out there doing the unexpected things, the salty things that nobody else in the world is doing. This is a true story that happened in Idleman's church. He said a boy stole something from one of the members of the church's store, and the owner of the store didn't press charges. He said, I want you to come by the store. So he had him come to the store, and the boy paid back the item that he stole, and his dad apologized. He said, I'm not going to press any charge. I just want you to do one thing. I want you to come to church. Well, he went to church, and come to find out the boy had an addiction, so they set him up in recovery and help for his addiction. They'd been trying to get this family of the boy that was addicted to come to church for years. And they never were able to get that family to come. But after they helped a boy by not pressing charges and trying to get to the root of the problem, they all came to church. So you tell me what changed. Why would a family start coming to church when nobody could get him to come to church for years, but he showed compassion on a thief, and they started coming to church? That's second mile behavior, isn't it? The store owner put salt on his behavior. So when we hear this teaching of Jesus, we say, who in the world lives like this? Like he said, we hear all this, we're going to make excuses, and we're going to say, yeah, but we justify ourselves. Who even lives like this? The Christians I know don't live like this. And yet Jesus tells us to live like this. So who does? Who gets hit and turns the other cheek? And who gets sued and hands over their coat? And who, when they're forced to go 1 mile, volunteers for a second? I can definitely see how this could make a difference, but who is doing it? And the answer is Jesus did it, and he's our example. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, it says, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, as he already existed in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He emptied himself by taking the form of a bondservant, and being born in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, death on a cross. At the end of his life, Jesus, the Son of God, was falsely accused. He was unjustly arrested. He was violently beaten. A soldier blindfolded him. Another slapped him. Another spit in his face. He was brutally mocked, and they ripped all his clothes off. Mark 14:65 says, some of them began to spit on Jesus. They blindfolded him and hit him. Guess who hit you? They said. And the guards took him and slapped him. When Jesus was slapped, did he slap back? Nope. Could he have slapped back? Did he have the power to slap back? We can't mistake his love for weakness. They might have had a garrison of soldiers that day, but Jesus said he could have called 12 legions of angels. Matthew 26:51, when they were in the garden, one of those who was with Jesus drew his sword and struck at the high priest's slave, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him. "All who take the sword will die by the sword. Don't you know that I could call on my Father for help, and once he would send me more than 12 armies of angels?" And knowing what Roman legions were, that's 72,000 angels. But in that case, how could scriptures come to truth which say that this must happen? So Jesus could have slapped back. He could have done more than slapped. With every insult hurled, with every punch thrown, with every drop of blood shed, those angels were at notice and ready to come. All Jesus had to say was, "Okay, get them." So as they were getting restless, they were slapping Jesus around, and he didn't do anything. But did Jesus actually need 72,000 angels to help him? No, because he was God. With every punch thrown, with every drop of blood, all he would have had to have done was blink his eyes, and he could have struck them all blind. He could have nodded his head, and they would all be paralyzed. One word from his mouth, and he could curse them all to hell. He didn't say a word. Until he was nailed to the cross, he spoke for the first time, and what did he say? Anybody know? What did Jesus say from the cross, the first thing? "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And so we say this is radical living, and who does that kind of thing? Jesus did it, and he's asking us to do that because it brings glory to God, and it'll bless our life. One person at a time, we need to go an extra mile. We'd like to change the world by posting all kind of stuff on social media or doing something else. More than likely, your greatest impact in life will be one offense at a time. Throughout your life, people offend you. What are you going to do? You're going to be insulted over and over again in your life. How are you going to respond to insults? You're going to be irritated and aggravated many times in your life. How are you going to respond to others then? If we go an extra mile, like we said, it's going to make a big difference. Anybody have any thoughts or comments? Okay, as far as updates, John Tom Lindsay, we've been praying for him, but Mandy said he's out of the hospital and doing much better. He was having some kidney issues. And we were asked to pray for Chris Laquette, for Shannon Richard, for Gina Gazzino Crooks, for the Taylor May family, they all have the flu, Linda Trohan with her kidneys, Kelly May and Miss May has allergies. Any other updates? Yes. Steve Eaton family. Okay. That was a man that was in the church she grew up in. Sister's father-in-law, okay? Anybody else? Any other updates? Is Jack still in the hospital? How long is he going to be there? Don't know. What was her last name again? Margaret Briscoe. Margaret Briscoe's in the hospital still. Anybody else? All right. Boo, do you want to lead us? Okay, good.